Can you remember a time when almost every movie or TV show that came out had a game attached to it? Seriously, it was everywhere! Name any family film released from the 80s to around 2015 or so, and you'll probably be able to find a game that was released alongside it. Night at the Museum, A Series of Unfortunate Events, The Adventures of Tintin, basically every Disney and Pixar movie, Monster House, Shrek, lots and lots of Shrek, and so many more. It wasn't even just family films either. There was a game made for The Bachelor. Yeah, the dating show. I'm not joking. I've noticed that in recent years, licensed games have more or less disappeared compared to how many were being released at their height. This part of the industry has mostly transitioned to much larger, high-production games like Insomniac's Spider-Man games or the Batman Arkham series. Budget-oriented games like the ones I grew up with are more common on mobile devices these days. Sometimes you'll see a few of these games slip through the cracks, especially for the more popular franchises, but they aren't absolutely everywhere anymore. And I think it's safe to say that the low-budget licensed game released for every movie and show under the sun is a dead concept. It's easy to write off all these games as just quick cash grabs. And yeah, I'll admit, most of them are. I don't want to talk about the damn Ant Bully game on the GameCube. However, I still feel that these games have earned an important part in the history of gaming. For a lot of people who were raised in this era, these were the games we grew up on. If you were a dumbass kid with zero taste who wanted a game just because it had SpongeBob on the cover, you probably played a lot of these. It's me. I was the dumbass kid. This video is an ode to this peculiar bygone era of gaming. An era where quality was not as much of a concern compared to just getting the game out the door in time for its source material to still be relevant. I have very fond memories of a lot of these games, so it should be pretty interesting to discover if those memories have some basis in reality, or if I'm just wearing a particularly strong set of rose-colored glasses. So grab your extremely expensive SpongeBob GameCube controller, because it's time to enter the forgotten world of licensed games. Jimmy Neutron was a cartoon that I remember being able to catch on TV a few times as a kid, but I never really considered myself a big fan of it. That honor goes to a certain yellow sponge who we'll be talking about later. However, I really like the concept of the show, its world, and its characters. The show centers around Jimmy Neutron, a boy genius whose intellect enables him to create wacky inventions that usually create chaos for his hometown of Retroville. The show leaned heavily on absurdist humor and ran entirely on cartoon logic as far as the science for the inventions goes. Seriously, this show can get kind of nuts, and it's great. Nickelodeon heavily promoted this series when it was new, even working with the Universal Studios theme park to create a full-blown ride just for this show. It should be no surprise then that a video game tie-in was released in 2006. This game, Jimmy Neutron Attack of the Twonkies, was the absolute bane of my existence as a kid. Not because I hated the game. No, as a matter of fact, I actually really enjoyed this game. For about 80% of its runtime. I was completely unable to beat this game as a kid because of one singular level towards the end that effectively gated me from seeing the ending. The opportunity to close that chapter of my life was one I couldn't pass up when I started making this video. This game is a tie-in to the Attack of the Twonkies TV special, which I still have never seen, so it shares most of the plot with a few changes to keep things moving. Jimmy takes a visit to the comet Twonkus 3 in his rocket, and after stealing state secrets from the Soviet Union, no, I'm not joking, he arrives to find the planet inhabited by monstrous aliens he dubs Twonkies. A few smaller Twonkies stow away with him and end up on Earth, where it turns out that music causes them to evolve into monstrous forms. Think the movie Gremlins, but less, horrifically violent. The Twonkies escape into Retroville and begin causing havoc, so it's up to Jimmy to figure out how to catch all of the creatures and save the day. While the story of this game is really nothing to write home about, the writing is what makes it so special. This game captures a lot of the charm and goofy humor from the show and translates it perfectly to game form. I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out that some of the writers from the show worked on this, because it feels like an extended episode of the show, complete with a ton of familiar characters who are all mostly voiced by their original actors.
Miss Fowl and I will go back and make sure there are no more children about. School emergency! We have a school emergency, people! Don't panic! Leave in a calm manner! Please don't raise your voices, then you won't be able to hear me yelling at you! Come with me! Follow me, but don't run! Don't run! Get out of my way! And don't panic!
It really makes this game feel like an actual episode of the show that you're able to play. The best way that I can describe Attack of the Twonkies gameplay is with one word: simple. This is a very simple, albeit mostly effective, kids game. It's entirely linear, and it doesn't present much in the way of replay value. It's also very short, clocking in at around 5 hours from beginning to end. This short length results in the game having a very fast pace. You're never stuck doing one thing for too long, and the game is constantly presenting you with fresh set pieces and gameplay elements right up until the end of the game. By picking up glowing items scattered across the various levels, Jimmy can invent a variety of gadgets and gizmos to aid him in his quest. Some of these are crucial to progression, but most of them take the form of basically joke items, like shoes that scribble rainbows on the floor, or a hair curler that gives Jimmy an afro. While I would normally criticize something like this in a game, it is basically wasting the player's time, this game takes the concept so far that it just loops around and becomes funny again. It makes sense that so many of Jimmy's inventions would be either completely useless or even harmful when you consider how many problems he causes in the show itself. Plus, this is bound to make the target audience of 9-year-olds laugh their asses off, so no harm, no foul in my opinion. The two inventions you'll be using most in the game are the VDR and the Shenograph. Most Twonkies you come across will be either in their evolved Stomper or Gromp forms, so you'll need to de-evolve them using the Shenograph before sucking them into your backpack with the VDR. This combat comprises pretty much the entire second half of the game, and basically turns the game into Luigi's Mansion, but worse. Not to say that the combat is necessarily bad, it's just lacking in depth and becomes incredibly repetitive over time. There's only 3 enemy types, minus the additional forms, that really only change their color and attack speed. Each enemy only has 1 or 2 ways of attacking you that are incredibly easy to dodge by just jumping over everything, and there's not like a dedicated dodge button or anything, so you're going to spend a lot of your time jumping around like a kid on a sugar rush. The game soon becomes a repeating series of just using the Shenograph to de-evolve the Twonkies, capturing them with the VDR over and over, rinse and repeat until the level is over, and it can get kinda bland after a while. The game attempts to make up for this by offering a lot of variety in the level design. Each level is very different thematically from each other, and they're all based on locations from the show, which can be super fun to experience if you're a fan. There are often many rooms to explore, objects to interact with, many of which have unique dialogue and animations associated with them, puzzles to solve, mini-games you have to play to progress, or various challenges like using a jetpack while avoiding projectiles. This helps to break up the various combat encounters and keep the game varied. So the gameplay is simple, but it usually isn't very bad. However, there are a few things that hold this game back from being truly great, too. A really bad running trend for a lot of these licensed games is a very short length, which Attack of the Twonkies also suffers from. I don't need this game to be the next massive RPG epic or something, but I was able to beat it in just under 4 hours. When you're a kid and you don't have any money, new games can often be a rarity, so getting this game for Christmas or something, and it being so short, would probably be quite the disappointment for a lot of young gamers. The short length keeps the game's pace very quick, but a few more hours of gameplay would have been appreciated, especially considering that this game has little to no replay value. That brings us into my second criticism, which is the lack of depth. This game can only be completed the same way every time. There's no alternate ways of solving problems, no alternate weapons, no alternate costumes, no upgrades, no difficulty modes, or anything of that sort. When you've beat this game, you've basically seen everything it has to offer, which is a bit disappointing. Again, this game doesn't need to be a massive, sprawling experience. I don't need to be using a Path of Exile build guide for fucking Jimmy Neutron. I just think the game is very surface level and can get repetitive after a while. My last criticism has to be the boss fights. These were definitely the low point of my entire playthrough. The main problem with these fights is that they all have such janky, non-intuitive mechanics. The first large boss fight is against this weather boss who conjures lightning that you can absorb with an invention and launch it back at him with a seesaw. Sounds cool, right? Only problem is that it's a giant boss arena, there's only one seesaw in the entire playground you can use, so the fight devolves into running circles around the arena until you can attack the boss. That is, unless the invention just doesn't land in the very small area of the seesaw that it needs to be on, in which case the entire attack will just fail. All of the bosses have their own janky mechanics like this that are either unintuitive or just plain confusing. It isn't a big deal because there's only 4 major boss fights, but it is a blemish on this otherwise solid experience. Oh, and just one more thing. The Retroland arcade can suck it. Seriously, this room was the single reason why I couldn't beat this game as a kid. You're forced to play a bunch of very accurate replicas of 80s arcade games, and lo and behold, when I was 8 years old, I was not very good at 80s arcade games. Sure, it isn't very hard now, because I'm a 22-year-old with 0 life, but when I was 8 years old, I struggled so much with these arcade games that I just gave up on the game until this playthrough. Was I just that bad at fake Frogger? I don't even know! Just wanted to get that off my chest. Besides those few criticisms, Jimmy Neutron Attack of the Twonkies really impressed me upon returning to it. It may be really short and really simple, but it's a fun and well-made experience for what it is. The developers could have just as easily cheaped out on this, like what happened with the very first Jimmy Neutron game that we're not talking about in this video. They didn't need to put effort into the presentation or get the entire voice cast back to record for this game, but they did, and that love and care shows in the entire game. If you're a fan of Jimmy Neutron, definitely check this game out. I think you'll find a lot to love in this, and it isn't much of a time commitment to finish it either. Overall, I recommend giving this game at least a look at. So, I have already talked about SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom more on this channel and just in general than any sane human being probably should, so I'm going to keep this one short. SpongeBob SquarePants Battle for Bikini Bottom is one of the most well-known and beloved licensed games for a reason. This is a full 3D platformer akin to Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie that takes place in the world of SpongeBob. SpongeBob is just a franchise where the setting feels so perfect for a game like this. There's so many memorable and interesting locations in just the first few seasons that are just perfect to turn into game form. This game takes that opportunity and runs with it. So many areas from the show are here to explore, from Bikini Bottom itself to Rock Bottom and the Kelp Forest. On top of this, the game is filled with references to moments from the show that fans of the classic seasons of SpongeBob are sure to love. But loads of fan service a good game does not make. This game is still so beloved because of its gameplay. For me, this was the 3D platforming game I enjoyed the most on the GameCube, right next to Super Mario Sunshine. It's a fantastically designed game that takes all of the right notes from games like Super Mario 64 while cutting a lot of the more unnecessary aspects. Movement is quick and snappy, combat is simple but satisfying, and the game is easy to learn while leaving just enough mechanical complexity in there for an entire speedrunning community to be built around this. I've replayed this game every year or so since I was a kid because I just simply find it so fun to play. I think my only real glaring issues with this game come in the form of a few awkward difficulty spikes and the so-so presentation. Some of the challenges in this game can get a bit ridiculous, which made it basically impossible to 100% complete when I was a kid, because I guess as I'm learning in this video, I used to suck at video games. It isn't a huge issue because you don't have to collect every single item to see the ending, but it is still rather annoying when going for 100% completion. The second issue is honestly the presentation, which definitely could have used a bit more work. Most of the game honestly looks really good to this day, with a lot of color and excellent animation work. However, some of the lighting can get pretty buggy, especially in how the shadows are rendered, and the character animations during dialogue scenes are just very stilted and weird looking. I understand that the developers were probably on a tight budget and opted to use canned animations for all of these scenes, but it does stick out against the rest of the game. Overall, however, Battle for Bikini Bottom still stands the test of time. It's simply a fantastic game. Check out my video on it if you want more details, and give the game a shot if you're interested. You won't regret it. Kim Possible was a show that I completely missed growing up. I didn't really watch a lot of Disney Channel cartoons when it was still on the air, and by the time I got into a lot of those series, Kim Possible had been over for years. It wasn't until years later that my girlfriend convinced me to watch it with her, as she had grown up with the series. After watching the entire show, I was blown away. The show is a take on superhero and spy TV shows, with a very comedic style of writing and great characters. Kim Possible is a high school student who runs her own business on the side, where she solves problems and stops crime. She's got that side hustle going on. I respect it. The show manages to use this very simple concept to generate a lot of creative plots and tons of great dialogue. Seriously, the characters in this show are the best part of the entire thing, especially my queen, Shigo.
What have we learned?
No cloning.
Get in.
It should come as no surprise then that this show got a licensed game tie-in for the PS2 exclusively. Kinda weird that this never came to any other consoles. Must have been a budget issue or something. Kim Possible What's the Switch really surprised me, perhaps the most out of any game in this video. I knew ahead of time that it was a 2D platformer set in the Kim Possible universe, featuring the voices from the show and an original story to boot. What I didn't know was just how much this game would remind me of one of my favorite games of all time, Klonoa: Door to Phantom Isle.
What?
Yes, you heard me correctly. This is a 2D platformer that is entirely in that 2.5D Klonoa vein. The developers have a lot of fun moving the camera around and fiddling with the perspective while staying within the limits of 2D gameplay. It's interesting seeing a 2D platformer made in an era where they were really going out of style, especially a 2.5D game like this. It's certainly a unique choice for a licensed game from this era, and I respect it big time. While playing as Kim, you have a 3-hit combo chain, a dive kick, a wall jump, and a variety of gadgets at your disposal. You have to use all of these abilities to progress through levels, survive combat encounters, and solve relatively simple puzzles. A very interesting aspect of this game is that both Kim Possible and her rival Shigo are playable, and they each have their own styles in how their levels play out. Kim takes up the bulk of the game, featuring gadgets like a grappling hook or a gum launcher that lead to a lot of interesting platforming challenges and puzzles. Shigo, at least in the sections that I played, doesn't have any gadgets and primarily focuses on interesting combat encounters, like fighting enemies on top of moving cars. The two don't have a lot of differences going on, but it is nice to be able to play as both characters, even if Shigo's energy powers do look a bit too much like fart clouds coming out of her hands. I only played through the first hour or so of the game, but what I did play impressed me a lot. Presentation-wise, it's great. The graphics have a very pleasing, cel-shaded style that fits the source material perfectly. The character models mostly look pretty good, although they could serve to look less like they're all melting to death. There are unlockable costumes for both Kim and Shigo, some of which are references to moments from the show, which is honestly pretty cool. The audio is great too. The entire voice cast comes back for the game, and they sound fantastic as usual. The music is made up of a few original songs that are made in the same vibe as the original show, and they're honestly really catchy. I found myself listening to a few of them in the background as I wrote the script. The only quibble that I had with the game sound-wise were the occasionally generic-sounding sound effects and enemy grunts, but that was about it. However, it isn't perfect. Yet again, a short length hurts this game quite a bit. I only played about an hour and a half of the game, yet according to how long to beat, I already experienced half of what it has to offer. That's a bit extremely short, honestly. There's nothing wrong with short games, Hell, some of my favorite games of all time are short. However, those games work because they're very replayable and can offer a different experience each time. From what I've played of this, I don't see much of a reason why anyone would want to play through a second time, besides nostalgia or sheer boredom. Regardless, Kim Possible What's the Switch really impressed me. If you're a fan of this series, you honestly might want to check it out, especially considering that it's not very expensive on the secondhand market. I might go back to this just to finish it and I guess never have to touch it again, but we'll have to see.
4 notorious villains with a plan to destroy the Nicktoons universe will face off against a heroic foursome united in defending it. For the first time ever, Jimmy Neutron, Timmy Turner, Danny Phantom, and SpongeBob SquarePants join forces to battle the greatest criminal minds the Nicktoons universe has ever known. Nicktoons Unite, saving the Nicktoons universe one world at a time.
The Nicktoons Unite series of games is one that has always really confounded me as to how it even manages to exist. Seriously, this is like every early 2000s kid's fanfiction dream. All of the Nicktoons coming together for one giant story, with every character you can imagine being playable, even including their original voice actors and references to the series they came from. It's just a shame that the first game didn't live up to this promise at all. Yeah, I wasn't very impressed by Nicktoons Unite. This is a very simple multiplayer beat 'em up that is aimed squarely at young kids and no one else. Well, I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised about that. A part of me was still hoping for something interesting to mine from this experience, and I just didn't find that. The first game was released in 2005, and you can tell from the very beginning that the budget for this was somewhere between $2 and a sack of rotten potatoes, because this game barely looks better than a PS1 game. This is the title screen. I'm not joking with you. I've not edited this. This is real. I think the best part of this is that the music doesn't even play in both of the audio channels, just the left. What? I made sure I was set to stereo sound, I checked my headphones, I did everything I possibly could, so this was either just a major oversight or nobody cared enough to fix it. I honestly don't know which is worse. To be honest, guys, I couldn't play much of this game. It's the only game in this entire video where I just couldn't stomach it after a while. I felt physically sick playing this game. This game is so ridiculously poorly made that it isn't even so bad it's good, it's just bad. Starting from the top, the presentation is terrible in so many aspects. The character models are extremely uncanny and just unpleasant to look at. The areas are super low in detail and barely even look like they come from their home series at all. The cheap looking dialogue boxes complete with completely unvoiced text are just mwah, chef's kiss. Dialogue animations and cutscenes look hilariously bad too. Danny's shocked face in this cutscene never fails to make me laugh. And what did they do to Jimmy Neutron's face? While it is nice that the original voice actors for most of the characters came back to voice them in this game, the rest of the game's audio presentation is just garbage. Beyond that hilariously poor title screen from earlier, most of the music just sounds like generic stock music and hardly fits any of the areas in the game. Half the time there's just weirdly ambient and atmospheric sounds, which barely fit the vibe this game is supposedly going for at all. Sound effects are generic and very repetitive, as are voice grunts for attacks. It feels like this game spawned out of the back rooms or something, I swear to God. However, what truly kills any enjoyment this game could have given me is the god-awful gameplay. I have played plenty of beat-em-ups in my time, and this has to be one of the worst, if not the worst beat-em-up I have ever played. There is absolutely zero depth here, to the point where I'm not sure what kind of enjoyment a kid is supposed to get out of this. This game is so easy to break. Seriously, just play as Timmy Turner and spam the hell out of the attack button and you win. It's a long-reaching projectile, it has really good damage, you unlock it as soon as you start the game, and it comes out way faster than the other characters' attacks. There's basically zero reason to play as anybody else beyond the occasional section where they're necessary to solve a puzzle or something. This is the entire game. Running around, spamming the attack button until you win, that's it. And the worst part about it is that it's so slow. Every character moves like they're walking in molasses, and the pace is absolutely destroyed because of it. This should be a fast-paced, fun action game for kids, but instead, it feels like I'm trudging through the desert while I'm dying of thirst. You may be wondering why I'm being so critical of this game. It's just a game for kids, who cares? Well, honestly, I think that kids deserve to have good games made for them too. Mario and Sonic are marketed towards kids, but you never hear this kind of talking point about those series. A lot of these games were released as budget titles for people who couldn't afford the larger games. So if you're a kid and this is your only experience with gaming, then that sucks because you're just not going to have a good time playing any of these. Children aren't stupid. They can tell when what they're playing sucks. The target audience being children does not give the developers a get-out-of-jail-free card to make the game as bland and boring as possible because of the off chance that younger kids won't be able to play it. Newsflash, kids need to be challenged in order to gain new skills and further their mental development. If the only games they ever get to play are the electronic equivalent of stale oatmeal, then what are they gaining from this entire experience? Nothing. I don't think the developers of this game set out to make a boring, bad game. I think they were limited by their budget and their scope and probably 8 million other reasons. But I can't talk about what the developers experienced because I wasn't there. All I can talk about is the game that was released and the game that I played when I was 7 and I hated it. Even for just this short play session, this game made me feel like my soul was being sucked out of my body. I see no reason why any child would enjoy this game beyond the surface level enjoyment of being able to play as their favorite characters, and maybe the multiplayer mode, because everything's better with friends. There's no one aspect of this game that sticks out as being so bad that it drags everything else down. It's just that everything is so terrible that it all fuses together into a mind-numbingly boring and unenjoyable experience that I will probably, hopefully, never have to go back to. Which is why I'm very happy to say that the sequel, Battle for Volcano Island, is a massive improvement. This was the Nicktoons game that I primarily played as a kid, and it was the one I was truly looking forward to revisiting. I didn't really anticipate the first game being so piss poor, so I was a bit worried that Volcano Island wouldn't be as fun as I remembered. Thankfully, right as the first level began, I was proven wrong. It's apparent very quickly that the developers took notes about what didn't work in the first game and made an honest effort to improve all of it here. The presentation has received a massive upgrade. Character animations are much more lively and expressive this time around, really feeling like cartoon characters in game form. SpongeBob could gain to look less like a Five Nights at Freddy's animatronic, but I digress. The game visually is much brighter and more interesting, not featuring the washed out darkness of the areas in the previous game. The music and sound effects in this game are actually really enjoyable, featuring a lot of catchy tunes for the levels, and sound effects that don't make me want to cave my skull in. What a shock! The biggest improvement in this game, however, has to be the gameplay. Everything from combat to just walking around feels faster and snappier, which helps fix a lot of the pacing problems that the first game had. Just from the start, the movement speed has been drastically increased, meaning that there's less downtime between the combat encounters and the pace just keeps on going. Attacks feel much better due to a combination of the faster animations and the improved sound effects. There are new projectile attacks that, while they aren't extremely useful all the time, give Volcano Island an element of variety that the first game lacked. This game's actually fun to play this time, which is probably the biggest compliment I can throw at it. I felt just as invested in the game as I did when I played it as a kid, which is something I honestly never expected to say. What also helps is that the game actually has funny dialogue and character moments this time around. You may have noticed that I never even bothered to talk about the story from the first game, and that's because nothing in said story stuck out to me enough to even bother writing about it. Volcano Island still doesn't have a great story, but the writing across the board is miles better, and there's more moments in between levels for the characters to talk to each other, all fully voiced. These moments are small, but they're also what make a crossover game so special. By focusing on the crossover element of the game, there's a lot more great dialogue exchanges and fan-servicey moments for the fans, and I honestly really enjoyed a lot of it. I played this game for far longer than I did the first game, and I honestly might come back and finish it because I was just having so much fun. It isn't the greatest game in the world, don't get me wrong. It's not like I've discovered some lost hidden gem here. But after the mess that was the first game, I'm glad to see that the developers of this series really tried their best to make a better game, and I would say that they succeeded. If you're a big fan of this era of Nicktoons, definitely check out this game. You might find that you enjoy it just as much as I did.
There's something headed your way.
Wait. I hear something. I'm gonna take a look.
Want to hear something really creepy? I was reading about Shandor, you know, the guy who donated most of the Gozer stuff. He was into the occult, you know, supernatural. Weird dude.
Well, why don't we talk about it some other time? Any other time.
Hey, you can't be in here. Stop!
You probably weren't expecting me to talk about a game for adults after an entire video of nothing but kids games, right? I swear I'm not an overgrown child. Ghostbusters the video game is one of my favorite games from my childhood. I first watched the original Ghostbusters movie when I was in elementary school, and even though I didn't understand about 80% of the humor, I still really enjoyed it. The movie is built on a fantastic concept that is elevated even further by great writing and incredible performances by its main four actors. I still quote this movie all the time because it has just drilled a very deep hole into my brain and refuses to leave.
Egon, this reminds me of the time you tried to drill a hole through your head. Remember that?
That would have worked if you hadn't stopped me.
Even though its sequels are of questionable quality, the series has still managed to leave an indelible mark on all of pop culture, and that's for good reason. Ghostbusters video games have existed for as long as the movies have, but not all of them have been good. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that most of them haven't been good. Really, really not good.
The fuck was that?
Ghostbusters!
So, when this game was announced, I have to imagine that there wasn't a lot of excitement for it. Thankfully, Ghostbusters the video game is an absolute triumph in the history of licensed games, being an excellent accompaniment to its home franchise, as well as being a fun and well-made game on its own. Funnily enough, there are actually two completely different versions of this game. There's the one we're going to be talking about for the HD consoles, and then there was the cartoony version for the Wii and PS2, which I've honestly never played and I don't think I really want to. Consider it the Sonic Unleashed HD versions versus Sonic Unleashed Wii version. You play as a newly hired rookie Ghostbuster who joins the original four members of the team as ghost activity begins to perk up around the city. After only a few nights on the job, a grand conspiracy of supernatural design that threatens to destroy the entire world is unveiled, and the Ghostbusters are the only ones who can stop it. As the rookie, you'll journey across New York City, gaining more abilities and becoming a better buster as you uncover the source of the ghostly activity. They better be paying us more than minimum wage for this because holy shit. This game really feels like an extended sequel to the original movies, and that's because it more or less is. It was written by the original writers of the movies, it's based on a bunch of unused concepts for the Ghostbusters 3 movie that was never made, and it features many of the original cast members reprising their roles. Yes, That includes Bill Murray, who I'm honestly kind of shocked even bothered to show up at all. The humor is on point and just as quotable as the best lines from the films. Some of the line delivery could use a bit of work, but considering that these actors hadn't played these roles in over 20 years when this game was made, I can excuse it just a little bit. So the writing is great, the story is fitting for the franchise, and the fan service is all over the place. What about the gameplay? Well, in an interesting twist, this game plays basically like Gears of War meets Ghostbusters. I know that sounds terrible, but hear me out. Your character moves in a pretty standard third-person shooter style. You move pretty slowly, but you have a dodge as well as a full sprint available to make up for this. Your basic means of attack is the proton stream, which can be activated by holding down the right trigger. By attacking ghosts with the stream, you'll whittle down their health, till eventually you can grab them with the stream and direct them into a ghost trap. Jimmy Neutron, eat your damn heart out, kid. Over the course of the game, you'll unlock more abilities like a shotgun blast of energy or the slime launcher from Ghostbusters 2. Every enemy is weak to a different weapon, so keeping track of every enemy in the battle and managing your weapons is a must. Beyond your choice of weapon, you also have to manage the heat level of your proton pack, which is basically this game's equivalent to reloading your gun. A really cool aspect of this game is that a lot of elements that would be shown on the HUD in any other game are instead shown directly on the proton pack on your character model, such as your heat gauge. In lieu of having ammo limits for your various attacks, you instead have infinite shots that must be managed with the heat gauge. Each attack you do will raise this gauge, and letting it get too hot will result in a forced venting of the heat, which can put you in a really precarious spot in the middle of a fight. By pressing the right bumper, you can vent the pack yourself, which is a significantly shorter process that is much safer. The heat gauge is honestly a really inventive take on the concept of reloading that I think works perfectly in this game and really makes it stand out from other third-person shooters of the time. I guess I honestly can't really imagine the Ghostbusters reloading a Lancer assault rifle. Then again, that sounds awesome. So, the combat mechanics are really solid, but how's the combat in practice? Well, that's where I do think this game can falter just a bit. When it's good, it's really good. You feel like you're an actual Ghostbuster battling ghosts the same way you saw in the movies, and it's fantastic. There's nothing more satisfying than pulling a ghost into a ghost trap while objects get destroyed around you. Bustin' makes me feel good indeed. However, past the halfway point of the game, more and more ghosts begin to get flung at you until it gets a bit overwhelming. You will die. Quite a bit, most likely. This is a surprisingly tough game at times, and a lot of that is due to the sheer amount of stuff you have to handle all at once. Lots of enemies, projectiles, flying bats, attacks that do a ton of damage, on top of juggling elemental resistances, can really make this game pretty tough at points. What really doesn't help is the AI of the other Ghostbusters. This is probably the biggest criticism I've seen levied towards this game over the years, and it's honestly for a pretty good reason. This is some pretty pathetic AI. You'd hardly believe these guys are veterans in this line of work with how many times they'll be knocked out and require you to resuscitate them, leading into a pretty long revive animation that can cause you to take damage or even die to attacks from enemies. It just adds to the general chaos of the combat encounters, and not in a good way a lot of the time. Overall though, I think the combat in this game is surprisingly solid. No, it's not perfect, but it could have been oh so much worse considering what material they had to translate to game form. The game really makes you feel like Spider-Man, a Ghostbuster, and for that, I have to commend it. But combat isn't the only thing going on in this game. There's a surprising amount of exploration gameplay contained in this, and I honestly think it's great. You have a PKE meter available at all times, which you can use to track ectoplasmic energy and find your way forward through the various levels. All of the ghosts in this game can be scanned, similar to something like Metroid Prime, which will unlock a new entry in Tobin's Spirit Guide that can provide you with the ghost's weaknesses as well as fun descriptions. Additionally, there are tons of cursed artifacts scattered around every level, and collecting these will unlock even more entries that describe various facets of the Ghostbusters universe. The best part about all of this, however, is that all of these collectibles appear in the firehouse once collected, and some are even able to be interacted with. These collectibles were honestly my favorite part of the game as a kid, and they were a total treat to rediscover upon this replay. One last aspect of this game that I just need to mention is the atmosphere. This game has a fantastic atmosphere overall, managing to place you squarely within the world of Ghostbusters by using as much music and sound effects from the movies as humanly possible. This doesn't feel like a generic third-person shooter with a Ghostbusters skin on top. It really does earn the right to be called a Ghostbusters game. On top of all of this, the game manages to get surprisingly close to a horror game at times compared to other Ghostbusters media. There's a lot of excellent use of silence and darkness in this, which can really ratchet up the tension. The game isn't afraid to get downright creepy when it wants to either. Seriously, that part with the ghost kids in the library?
It's children. What are they saying?
No, thank you. This focus on atmosphere and immersion really helps this game to stick in your mind long after you're done playing it. There were moments in this game that I could vividly remember from when I played it as a kid, even though I hadn't played it in years. To me, that's the mark of a truly memorable game. For a while there, this was the closest thing to an official Ghostbusters 3 that was ever released, and it still is in the eyes of many fans. Honestly, myself included. It earned that reputation by sticking close to the source material and honoring it through and through, while still providing a fantastic experience to play. I wouldn't have been so eager to return to this game if I knew it wasn't so fun, but I can assure you it is. Sure, it isn't the next Game of the Year contender, but it's a fantastic game for what it is. The developers could have easily chosen to do the bare minimum and ride off the success of the movies, giving us a terrible cash grab of a game that no one would care about a year after it released. Instead, they poured as much love and passion into this game as they possibly could, and gave the fans something truly special. This was the final time that the original 4 Ghostbusters ever worked together, before the untimely passing of Harold Ramis, and I'd say that this game is completely worthy of being that final project. If you're a Ghostbusters fan and somehow you haven't played this yet, give it a shot. I promise you will love it. Licensed games are a truly chaotic grab bag of varying quality. Sometimes you get something fantastic like Ghostbusters the video game. Other times you get an absolute trash fire like Nicktoons Unite. It's easy to write these games off as just some forgotten relic of the past. Who cares about some crappy Nicktoons game when you could have been playing the latest AAA first-party game on the same console? However, we have to remember that, like it or not, these games are part of the childhoods of so many gamers today. I'm sure that many of you watching this video right now can say the same. I certainly can. Not all of us were able to play the hottest and newest games, or perhaps we weren't even aware that they existed. I didn't play my first Zelda game until 2014, and I didn't play Sly Cooper or Ratchet & Clank until far later. For me, games like Nicktoons Unite and Jimmy Neutron Attack of the Twonkies were my childhood. Sure, I was able to play the newest Mario games and Sonic games, but that wasn't an always thing. Usually, these licensed games were the games that my family could afford or rent. These were the games I showed interest in, and these were the games that sparked my imagination. At the end of the day, that's all we can ask a game to do, to entertain. That's why, despite all of the criticism I've levied against so many of the games in this video, I can't get completely angry at them. As long as they made just one person happy, then they've done their job. Whew! I'm finally done making the license game video. Now I can finally get back to playing real games, like The Bachelor on the Wii.